we're just gonna do like a little quick thing on ischemia. I talked about it yesterday with a group of people, and so this was brought that people wanted to learn more about. So when we're talking about ischemia, we've got a couple of key concepts. The first one that I'm gonna mention a lot is something called the isoelectric line. This is kind of the imaginary flat line when you're looking at a QRS complex or like an EKG complex, where everything starts and returns to. So this is a good example of it. I kind of drew where the imaginary isoelectric line is. You could see how the P wave starts at the electric line and it'll come back. Same thing with your R wave. It takes off from there, it'll return to there. Same with your S and then your T. This is really important when we're talking about ST elevations and ST depressions, because what makes something elevated or depressed is how far above or below it is from that imaginary isoelectric line. So we know ST elevations are signs of cardiac ischemia. So when I'm talking about an ST elevation, again, the green is like the isoelectric line. You could see the R and the S go, but the T wave starts above that isoelectric line. So that's how you can tell if something is elevated. Theoretically, for it to be considered like a STEMI or a true like elevation, it needs to be greater or equal to 2 of the like vertical blocks. So 2 blocks, which is a measurement of like 0.1, whatever the little mm's, or whatever the measurement is. An ST depression is the exact opposite of an ST elevation. Again, your P wave starts and comes back to RS, but your T wave will start below that isoelectric line and it does not come back to that isoelectric line. This has to do with ischemia and the way that the tissue dies. It's hard for the heart to relax and refire. So when we're talking about ischemia in a 12 lead, the true definition of it is you have to have ischemic changes in 2 contiguous leads. Contiguous is just the really fancy version of saying right next to each other. So how do we know which leads are where and what is next to each other? I learned this mnemonic a very, very long time ago. I don't even know if it's really a mnemonic, but the mnemonic is Sally. So everything is just in 2s because it's pairs, right? Because you need to have pairs of leads, so all of our letters are in pairs. So what I do is I write down S, S, A, L, L, I. So we spell it that way, and then I'll get to that. And then you just march down your V leads, and this is why this is so good. You don't have to really remember anything besides the word Sally. So if I march down my V leads, it's V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, V6. And then the S stands for septal. The A stands for anterior. And the L stands for lateral. And then the I, if you think inferior, it's inferior, and AVF, if I knew what my letters were, because inferior has an F in it, so AVF, the F and F, inferior. So inferior, AVF, and the I's are just straight I's. Sally with an I's. So if you have elevations in 1 and 2, those are both of the septals. Same thing with the A's for the anterior leads, and the V5 and 6 are the lateral leads. Are you going to see?
I'm just examining.
Oh, okay. So when we're like looking at the heart, this is kind of how the heart and the coronary arteries go to. So the heart in your chest sits with the LV facing forward, and that's like the anterior side of it. The RV is kind of tucked underneath, and that would be considered the inferior side of it. So anterior and inferior. And these leads also are, you can tell which coronary artery feeds which. So over here is my little heart. You'll have your left main coronary artery, which will feed straight down into your LAD, and your LAD goes into your septum as well. So your LAD feeds your septal wall and your anterior wall. So we know your LAD is going to be represented by these because it's septal and anterior. So that's your LAD. Your circ will go around, it comes off the left main and it goes around and wraps around the side of the heart. So those are your lateral leads. So that's your circ. And then your RCA comes off the other side. It feeds your sinus node, and it feeds your right ventricle, so which is the inferior, because the opposite of anterior is inferior. So that would be your RCA, and also your sinus node. So whenever you have somebody who goes into like a first degree heart block or second degree 1 and 2, it's an issue with your sinus node. So a lot of times your RCA infarcts will also have conduction issues because that sinus node is being damaged as well. So when we're looking for like elevations, one of the things you can do to kind of like double check yourself is look for reciprocal changes. So reciprocal just means opposite. So wherever there's ST elevations, those opposite side of the heart should have ST depressions, and vice versa. A lot of times, sometimes the ST depressions are easier for us to see. So if you look for the ST depressions, you look at the other like anatomical opposite, and you might find your ST elevations. So what is the anatomical opposite? The anterior. It was like nursing pre-regs. You remember you had to like that packet, and it's like, what's the opposite of medial, lateral? So it's the same thing. The opposite of anterior is the inferior part. So your anterior leads are going to reciprocate for your inferior leads, and your lateral leads are going to reciprocate from your posterior leads, just the way that the heart sits. We can get posteriors if we do like a back EKG, or sometimes it'll like extend into your AVL. So that's how you look at the anterior and inferior leads. This is just like a diagram of what all of these leads are and how they like look at the actual heart. So the V1 through 6s we call precordial because they're around your heart. Your AVR, L, and F, it literally stands for right, left, and foot. And the A is augmented because the way that it uses these to calculate where leads 1, 2, and 3 are. So it's just different ways of looking at the heart. I did print out a couple of 12 leads. The reason why people wanted to learn about this today is one of our patients has quite the interesting 12 lead, and we kind of sat through this to work it through together to like look at ST elevations and depressions. And then I also have some pretty stereotypical changes. So I'll give you the stereotypical ones first. And you can take a look at it and try to see if you can see ST elevations, depressions, and you know where are they? Is it like a septal infarct, an anterior, lateral, and inferior? And again, so what I do is I start personally in V1 because that's just the easiest for me to read, and I will go through, and if I catch an ST elevation or a depression, I'll go to the anatomical opposite and look at it to see if there's changes to it as well. Here's another one. You can start there. You can pass it along and change.
I have to like sit and work through this.
Yeah, no, and that's the whole thing of it.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about, this isoelectric line, you want to look at the part. Sometimes it's easier with like a literal piece of paper. Mm-hmm. So on like V1, it's where it all kind of comes back to. Sure. So, or you can just look for wherever is flat. You can see how this kind of flattens out in between there. So that's your isoelectric line. See how it like lines up like that? Your P's take off from there, your Q's take off from there. Do you see how my T wave isn't taking off from that that isoelectric line? So that's the elevation right there. Do you see how in V5 the T wave takes off from that line, but in V2 it doesn't. See how it comes, the S wave comes back, but the T wave takes off from above. So that's the ST elevation. Same thing with V1. See how it's high up there, and a little bit in V4, but definitely not in V5, definitely not in V6. So we definitely have ST elevations, and in V3 there's ST elevations. So we definitely have elevations in V2 and V3. Those are the most prominent. So we can tell that 2 and 3 is an anterior infarct. So the opposite of anterior is inferior. So if you look at 2, 3 and AVF, do you see how you have ST depressions So again, this is our
Yeah.
isoelectric line. Our T wave is taking off below there. Same thing with AVF. It's a little bit more subtle, but the T wave is taking off. It's mostly really recognizable in lead 2 here.
Okay.
So you kind of look at where everything's taking off from and where it returns to, and that T wave definitely is taking off below that isoelectric line. So you have reciprocal changes in leads 2 from your ST elevations. Does that make sense?
Cool.
Yeah? Do you guys see what I'm talking about? Yeah, so these are 2 different ones. So when I'm talking about the isoelectric line, I kind of just like look for the one with the most flat. This one's pretty flat for me. So if you like literally take a piece of paper and line it up, that's the isoelectric line. You see how, especially in like V5, the P wave, like it'll take off from there, it returns from there. The QRS takes off.